Welcome back to another episode of the Nancy Levin Show. I am delighted today to be joined by my guest, Karen McMahon. She is a high conflict divorce strategist, certified divorce coach, and founder of Journey Beyond Divorce. She began divorce coaching in 2010 after recognizing that the pain of her divorce led her on a transformational journey into a powerful and unexpected new life. Karen leads a national team of divorce coaches in supporting people around the world to become calm, clear, and confident as they navigate divorce. Karen is the host of the acclaimed Journey Beyond Divorce podcast, the co-author of Stepping Out of Chaos, Turning Pain to Possibility, and creator of Journey Beyond Divorce's exclusive Divorce 101 strategic blueprint for high conflict divorce. Karen, welcome.
Nancy, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. And, as we've been preparing for this time together, one of the aspects we want to start exploring is the way that divorce provides a do-over. How divorce is actually a catalyst to designing our best new chapter. And before we hit record, I said, boy, the two of us can certainly speak ad nauseum about this particular angle. And so I'd love to begin with giving you the opportunity to share how you came into this work from your own experience.
Yeah, I think that we all entered divorce, heels dug in, wishing we were going in the other direction, fearing the worst nightmare outcome, overwhelmed, scared, afraid of the foreign land that the legal process is. And I had two young children, not yet in grade school. And I was coming out of a pretty high conflict short. I think at that point, when I first started thinking about it, we were together 7 years. When I left, it was 14. So it was quite the journey to decide to leave. I was a child of divorce. And so I was hell-bent on making it work until I realized that I could only control myself. And the other half of the party wasn't quite as committed. But my divorce journey was a 3.5-year legal battle. I lived in the attic. I had walkie-talkies for my kids. The police had to come to the front door. CPS was called 3 times. I was a fully commissioned salesperson and lost like 75-80% of my income because I was an emotional hot mess. And my then husband was so devastated that I would leave and so angry and unhinged by it. And that went on for years. And so it was a very hard household to live in. It breaks my heart when I think about the children. I was a hot mess, so I engaged in all of the wrong behaviors. And 3.5 years later, over the course of that time, I got into a 12-step program. I had a therapist. I started keeping the focus on myself. I started stepping into the possibility that this was for me. Not an easy pivot by any means. And then at some point, I actually really leaned into my faith. And instead of praying for all of the outcomes I wanted, I started praying for God's will in His time, and just the patience, strength, and tenacity to abide. And it was a real surrender for me, and that was the beginning of letting go and seeing the miracles that happen when one lets go. When I emerged on the other side, I remember calling my best friend and saying, "I am so excited about the human being I have become." And never expected it, but really glad to be on this side of things. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know from my own divorce experience that so many of us wait for a crisis before we take action. And sometimes we need a lot of time to mobilize into the action, even if we know that it's something we need to do or something that we want to do, even if it's terrifying. And so one of the things when you were sharing, you said, I engaged in the wrong behaviors. I'm curious what those were and what way in which you turned against yourself, and then how you said, then you came to the place of surrender. You said 12-step, you said turning toward your faith. What are you categorizing as the wrong behaviors? I'm curious.
Well, I would say on a very foundational level, I was fully resistant of who my spouse was and how he showed up. And so I was always surprised. I was always outraged. I was always telling him how he should be different.
Right.
And so when I learned that really doesn't work very well, how's that working for you, Karen?
Right.
And began to learn about what would accepting him in all of his shades be, the things that I fell in love with, the things that don't work for me. When I was in resistance, I would engage. And so there were, I would like to say, emotional grenades being tossed across the room on a regular basis. And we would engage in blame and accusation and raise voices. And I also was incredibly boundary oblivious. And so I blamed him for things that I would now take responsibility for because I didn't know. I just didn't know what a boundary was. I didn't understand it. There was one day where he was screaming and yelling. He had an anger management issue and a very nasty tongue. And he was screaming and yelling and cussing at me. And I remember Nancy looking at the table by the front door and seeing my car keys. And it was almost like a divine download. The children will be fine with him. You can grab those keys and leave. You don't have to stand here and take it. And that is my memory of my first boundary, which no verbal aspect to it. I saw the keys. I was hearing him, wah, 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 you nasty, whatever. And I just grabbed the keys and I walked out. And I went for a drive and I calmed myself down. And it was an incredible aha for me that I was able to change my experience without him changing.
I mean, yes. And I love that you shared that. And, you know, I have very similar experiences being, you know, I actually thought that having no boundaries was what made me exceptional at my job. And having no boundaries in my marriage is what really ultimately sunk me into silence and into being willing to tolerate the intolerable and accept the unacceptable. And, you know, in a lot of the work I do with people around boundaries, it's always mind-blowing for people to realize that your boundaries don't need to be verbalized. And the boundary is between you and you. And having that download and that immediate insight and courage to grab the keys and leave, you know. And I love the way you said my first boundary. I write about my very first boundary in my book, Jump and Your Life Will Appear, which is my sort of trajectory of leaving my marriage, deciding that I'm going to have no contact and hitting send. And then even enduring all the emails coming back and the voicemails escalating and all of it, and just staying in the place of no contact because it was up to me to hold it, not anybody else. So I really appreciate hearing what you're sharing.
You know, I think that, we probably both talk about boundaries so much, and it's when you're coming from, and I'm a recovering codependent, recovering people pleaser, coming from my own dysfunctional family of origin, and I just didn't know. And it was such a moment of empowerment, right? Because I think my whole life, if I was upset, somebody was the cause of it.
Right.
And if I needed something to change, somebody needed to change so that would happen. And so I gave all my agency away over and over throughout my many relationships. And certainly I would say I used to be really proud of not only being low maintenance, but being no maintenance. When you're no maintenance, you attract people who don't want to give you anything, don't want to, care for you at all. And so that was a really big aha. But that boundary piece just invited in this new experience of empowerment, and that there was so much that I could do to manage my circumstances, regardless of how my spouse chose to behave.
Absolutely. I so appreciate what you're sharing here, and, being able to move out of that place of victim mode, being able to move out of the place of blaming, recognizing that boundaries are not about anyone else doing anything different. That is what moves us into taking responsibility and ultimately into our self-empowerment.
And freedom and liberation and
Amen.
Really beautiful, a beautiful depth of love in any relationship, intimate or otherwise, while having these boundaries. I think that I'm always talking to my clients, not only about their own boundaries, but about, the gift of teaching your children what a real boundary is.
Yes.
We can break generational chains. We can empower and inform and guide them in brilliant ways just with that one skill.
Absolutely. And I, in my divorce, because I didn't have kids, I wasn't in the position of needing to model for others in that way. But I'm curious if you'll speak to what it was like for you to experience the shift in yourself and also recognize that you were sending a message to your kids, that you were modeling what you chose to model for them.
Yeah, and as I got healthier, and certainly 3.5 years later, once I left, which was amazing, literally just moved the day I moved out and moved into my little barn, this finished attic, finished basement, English tutored, gorgeous home, like castle of the neighborhood, to this little barn, and I felt so free and so excited. And of course, when you're in a high conflict situation, there's often survivor's guilt because the children are still dealing with that household and the chaos. And my ability to help them not focus on dad, but focus on what they felt, what they experienced, what they did, what they would have liked to do differently, and how they could actually learn and grow through all the complications of this co-parenting and two different parents with different approaches. I think there's just so much there for parents if they would look at it from that vantage point, as opposed to, oh, your father, oh, your mother.
Right.
That is so the wrong way of going.
I'm curious what you would say is, in your experience, either the number one fear or the number one reason why people think they can't move toward divorce.
Well, I happen to specialize in high conflict, and so it's definitely a little bit of a different answer.
Yeah.
I think that when you're coming out of a very chaotic marriage with someone who typically has trauma or addiction or alcoholism or neurodiversion, a variety of mental health issues, they can be hard to be in a relationship with. And so often those individuals attract the people-pleasing codependent individuals who, we're the doormats. We give and we give and we give, and then we're the martyr walking around all angry and frustrated that nobody's giving back, but we can't receive because we have no ability to receive. But so we give and blame everybody. And so I think that the biggest fear is going toe-to-toe with what seems like a bully. And in my experience, he had anger management, and I did experience him as a bully, but I wasn't seeing my part in the dance. Once I saw my part in the dance, he actually got smaller. He wasn't this big bad bully because I became a grown woman again, or maybe for the first time. I grew into everything that I could be. And so I would say one of the biggest fears is the fear of going toe to toe with somebody who you have a power imbalance with. And I think the second greatest fear is there's just so many stories out there. And so the fear of stepping into a process where you really, for me, I thought I was going to lose every penny and lose hope. And those are our two most important assets in many, many ways. And so there's so much, people so often come to me, I do a, should you mend or should you end clarity call. And people come and they're all confused, and they're actually not confused at all. And
That's right.
Once we can just bring that down, that fear, and put them in a safety bubble, they actually know. It's scary and it's uncertain and it's a new land. But 9 times out of 10, they're actually not so unclear as they think they are.
I agree with you. I have people, I've coached over the years, plenty of people, should I stay or should I go? And really that's not the question, because it really is about, can I really step into the fullness, the wholeness of who I am, the truth of who I am, to at least be able to begin there. And
I think that we think we don't trust them, but which we may not.
Right.
We equally don't trust ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. And especially, everything you're talking about was the situation with me and my marriage. Very, very classic narcissist and, empath, if you will, people pleaser, peacekeeper, all of that. And, he knew how to fight dirty and I didn't even know how to fight. And so for me, like you said, coming toe to toe, I really had to learn. I had to really learn how to resource myself to be able to come into that kind of a conversation. And, it's one of those things where it's like catch-22 in some ways. I wouldn't have learned what I learned unless I had the experience, even though the experience was hell. All the way through in my divorce mediation, being able to stand up for myself financially, not having stood up for myself, all of that. It's a lot to learn all at once. And I would also say it's a lot to learn when we put our trust in lawyers and don't necessarily stand our own ground.
Well, it's so interesting. I've just been crafting this presentation that I'm going to do to family law attorneys. And it's so interesting that the first thing you think about is I need an attorney. When you're coming out of a high conflict divorce, so many of my clients have found the bully attorney. And then they find themselves sandwiched between the bully soon to be ex and the bully attorney. And so I often will talk about slow it down. First of all, you want to understand what you're getting into. Secondly, how are you choosing this person? This is your first really important relationship after deciding to divorce.
Yes.
The first thing we want to start doing is doing things differently. The more familiar it is, the more wrong it is. We want to find that discomfort, that unfamiliar, so that we know we're heading in the right direction. And then you want a team. And I so often talk about, I have 2 sisters. One was all about me and what I needed and, never bashed the ex. And the other one was more angry at my soon-to-be ex than I was. And I would find myself defending him to her. And I was like, okay, this isn't working for me. And so finding the healthy support team on a personal level, and then finding a divorce coach or a transition coach who can really come alongside you, because it is one of the most multi-dimensional transitions that we go through in a lifetime. I've spoken to people, and it's like, you lose a spouse, it's devastating, it's heartbreaking. For those who are, especially high conflict, you're divorced, you're still dealing with this person for the rest of your life. Plus you're dealing with how they deal with the kids, plus. and you lose friends and you lose in-laws and all of this. It's so important to have somebody who can come alongside you and be that sounding board, that reflection, that encouragement, that support for you to strive to be your best.
I agree. I'm curious for you, what, as you embraced the process of your divorce and as you emerged from your divorce unrecognizable,
Yeah.
which I certainly did too. What have you been able to do post-divorce that you didn't know was possible prior to that? Whether it's elements of desire and vision that you've brought to fruition, what would you say actually came to life because you were able to embrace divorce?
It's a really interesting question. I would say on a very foundational level, I live in peace. I live in peace regardless of my finances, regardless of my relationships, regardless of the election, regardless of what is happening in my life. When I was going through my divorce, my first 12-step program, a girlfriend joined me, and they said the word serenity, and I remember leaning over to them going, like I came from chaos. As a single woman, I lived in chaos, and then I married into chaos. And so finding my way to my center, and for me, I think the reason that I'm in such peace is because I'm so comfortable with myself. And that's because I've learned who I am. And we're all a work in progress. I'll be doing this work until the day I meet my maker. But I've learned so much about the good, bad, and ugly of who I've been designed to be. And so I think that the biggest change is that I navigate life and especially uncertainty and difficulties in a very different way than I used to. I also, I've learned that I have a heart of service and that my only job in the world is to be loved with every human being that I run into. And that is my mantra. When I don't know what to do, my mantra is just be loved and the rest fall into place. And so it might be more of an esoteric answer. I was always very successful professionally. So I love my divorce coaching business and my team of coaches and my clients. I love my podcast. I love what I do. But that's the doing.
Right.
I feel like the biggest change is how I choose to be involved.
And how do you notice that you approach or navigate relationships differently post-divorce? And I don't mean necessarily intimate partnership, but how do you notice that you navigate and relate to relationships differently?
I think one of the things, Nancy, that I realized was that I probably spent a lifetime not feeling seen and heard.
Mm.
And so I felt very unworthy. Every man I've ever with, and I left home at 19 and got married at 34, so do the math. I was always the lucky one.
Mm.
And so I think my best example is my children. It is so important to me to ensure that they always feel seen and heard by me.
Mm-hmm.
It's equally as important for me to set boundaries and let them know when I'm available and when I'm not.
Sure.
And in doing that, I would say I feel blessed to have a very broad and deep circle of friends who I know incredibly well. I don't know about you, but I find that whether it's the way God designed me or the growth through my divorce, I have a special gift of inviting people to get deep and vulnerable quickly. And it's like, that's where I like to go. And so no matter who I meet, whether they're sitting next to me on an airplane, or, when I'm taking the train or whatever, I engage in really lovely conversations. And And I choose to make sure people feel seen and heard and loved.
Share with me a little bit about the way that you work with your clients.
So I have a team of coaches, and we always invite people to jump on a call with us. It is our tithe if they're not interested in working, but it's an opportunity for anybody who's stuck to join us in a 1 hour conversation, get some new perspective, enjoy sounding board, to hear what they're saying, and there's no such thing as being stuck. So really to help them find their path to begin to move forward. And when people work with us, it's very each situation is unique. It's not like I have this 12-point system that we bring you through, but we meet you where you are. And in the course of working with us, there is a lot of self-reflection. There's a lot of skills. Many, many people come to us where their communication is very you-oriented, very conflict averse. And so teaching our clients about negotiating, about communicating, about boundaries, about owning their part is all part of it. And then we're very skilled in the legal process. And so I can speak to somebody and hear what's going on with their custody battle and talk to them about whether or not support, like attorneys for the children or custody evaluators or financial forensics and all of those players. And so we not only support them deeply on the emotional and the interactive part of it while they're still maybe all living under the same roof, but also that the landmine that the legal process often feels like. And you'll have primary caregivers who are so heels dug in about their spouse having any custody and being able to tease that out and get them of their own accord to realize what would be best for the children and how to move into something that's fair and reasonable. And so all of these conversations over the course of it could be a couple of months or a couple of years, really move them in the direction that they want to go and getting healthier and more confident and more clear.
Yeah. When I was going through my divorce, I was actually going through my coach training certification at that same time. And I also had a divorce coach with whom I worked. And for me, one of the biggest and most significant shifts, and this sort of goes back to what we were talking about around blame and being the victim and taking responsibility, was that I was the breadwinner and I kept using language around, I had to give him this, or I had to, sign over this, or I had to. And when I got to the place of recognizing I made a choice, I signed my name, I said yes. Once I was able to step into the seat of responsibility, everything changed around my own relationship to my own personal power. And that has been such a significant lesson I learned that has served me, a millionfold since then. And also realizing the ways in which we are so accustomed, when we are people pleasers, peacekeepers, conflict avoiders, when we don't want to rock the boat, we are so accustomed to giving our power away to someone or something else. And what a gift in the process of moving through a divorce, what a gift the opportunity to reclaim our power really is.
Yeah, I mean, that's so beautifully said. I think that I have a series on my Journey Beyond Divorce podcast. It's called Voices of Celebration. We have like 3 or 4 dozen former clients, and what each of them, they each tell their own version of a story that goes like this. I was scared to death. I was about to have the worst experience of my life that was totally against me. And then I emerged on the other side, and I was empowered, and I was taking responsibility for myself. And I was seeing the possibility of the best of my life being ahead. And I think that when you do it well and you have healthy support, I will say, I won't say always, but I'll say almost always. So,
Yeah. Do you experience clients who have trouble asking for help when they come to you? Or by the time they come to you, they're okay to be asking for help and receiving help?
I think that the resistance is less about asking for help. I do find that when the going gets tough, there's a segment of clients who bail.
Mm-hmm.
And I have followed a number of those clients. I have one fellow who I was working with like a year or two into my journey back in 2010, 2011. And he was doing great and he bailed. And it took him years to get back on track. And I recently reached out to him. I saw he got remarried and that he's in a really good place. And so I think that if I had a message for listeners who are going to be walking this path, it gets hard and it requires courage. It's easy to just blame the other person, walk away, and find another man or woman with the same face, a different face on the same person.
Absolutely.
Married. That's the easy thing. The
Yeah.
easy thing is to look outwards and blame them. The courageous thing is to look in the mirror and you do shadow work. So look at all of your both bright and shadow sides, own them, refine them, heal them. And in that very hard and very courageous work is a gift that keeps giving.
Beautiful. Karen, how can our listeners be connected to you? What's the best way?
Yeah. So if you're on the precipice, we have a free rapid relief call. You can go to rapidreliefcall.com and book a call and just have a breakthrough and some guidance for moving forward. Journey Beyond Divorce podcast is a great place to listen. I interview experts around the world. And journeybeyonddivorce.com is our website. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Karen. Thanks so much. And to everyone listening, I'll be back again with you next week.